Dear Mike, always great to see you, including via Zoom. And on behalf of the Centre for Strategic Philanthropy at the University of Cambridge, thanks for being part of this interview series titled The Business of Philanthropy, which looks at the current trends and outlook for strategic philanthropy around the world. Mike Milken is, of course, an accomplished philanthropist, financier, public health advocate, and medical research pioneer with a wealth of experience in a wide range of fields. Mike's own philanthropic journey began back in the 1970s in the field of medical research and public health. And in 1982, he co-founded the Milken Family Foundation, which continues to deliver life-changing programs in education, public health, and medical research. And in 1991, Mike founded the Milken Institute, which he continues to champion today and which is guided by a simple yet powerful mission to help people build meaningful lives with access to good healthcare, education, and employment, and the resources to create opportunities for themselves and their communities. If you're not familiar with the work of the Milken Institute and its 7 dedicated centers, that lead the delivery of its programs, I'd strongly encourage you to visit its website, milkeninstitute.org, because it really does take an innovative and strategic approach to generating philanthropic impact, and there's a lot that can be learned from it. Mike has obviously been widely recognized for his lifetime of achievements, and I'm grateful that he's agreed to share his insights with us today. Dear Mike, the work of the Milken Institute keeps human, financial, and social capital at the center of its operations. From your 3 decades of experience with the Institute, I wanted to seek your thoughts on what we can do to better engage philanthropic capital as a true partner alongside business capital and government capital in addressing our world's greatest challenges. And on a related note, what can we do to enhance authentic and effective collaboration between philanthropy, business, and government?
Well, one, it's wonderful to be with you today. You look healthy. I'm happy to see your family's doing well. And we are very excited about this efforts of this Center for Strategic Philanthropy. I think people underestimate what the true assets of the world are. And so you're used to reading a balance sheet or a financial statement, even if it's a foundation, and they're talking about financial assets or factories, roads, or other assets. They make up a very small part of the true assets of the world. And I think this is one of the focuses. In 1965, I wrote down this little formula where essentially access to financial capital, and it could be philanthropic or non-philanthropic, served as a multiplier effect on the world's greatest and most important asset, and that's the ability of people, human potential, often referred to as human capital. The second largest asset in the world is social capital, universal education, access to health care, and even creditor rights that come into play. And then lastly, the real assets you find on the balance sheet. And so with the founding of the Milken Institute, a decade or so after the founding of the Milken Family Foundation, we really focus on this area. And the value of human capital is measured in many ways, but it is in hundreds of trillions of dollars or thousands of trillions. And so when you think about what is going to propel our society, an emerging market, a South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, parts of the Middle East, you're really focused on the potential of human beings. And it takes different forms, but one important form is health, quality lives, lengthening life, and improving the quality of life and health. And next, it takes education. So you don't really see it like a glass of water. that as you go through education at different levels, you're filling up this glass of water and becomes more valuable. And then the other one of social capital, that everyone should have a feeling of upward mobility. I think I was 8 years old when my father told me that his grandchildren would not have an opportunity unless all children felt they at least had a chance and an opportunity. And so the role of government becomes very important in the social capital element. And lastly, I think from our standpoint, the environment in many ways has taken more importance today, sustainability. And it was 1969 when we sent back these pictures of this little blue planet from the satellites that were traveling, or the missions that were created to space. And you see this little small blue planet in the universe. And at the moment, we don't have any alternative. There's no other place where we can live. The closest star, about 4 million light years away, that estimated that might have a planet like Earth that could sustain life as we know it here, is not going to be reached in our lifetime, unfortunately. And so I think it gives you this appreciation of the importance of what is sustainable and what the environment is. And so each of them are challenged. In some ways, it's very easy to create collaboration. In the medical field, we told people we will not fund unless they can collaborate, unless they share. But understanding the importance of each of these elements that you referred to, philanthropy that can take enormous risk and try new things. It's kind of venture. If you think of a venture capital firm, it's venture philanthropy gets things going. And then the importance of government and government agencies. And lastly, if it's sustainable, getting business or industry. And so for ourselves, many, many years ago, we let people know we would fund them for 5 years. After that, we would no longer fund them. This gave them the understanding that they had to be able to stand on their own 2 feet or search for other sources from that standpoint.
It's a great example of a sustainable model. Mike, you've previously said that, and I quote, philanthropy is far more than just writing checks, and that it takes entrepreneurial approach that seeks out best practices and empowers people that change the world. Zooming in on our youth and our future leaders, how do you believe that the youth of today, including the next generation of socially conscious consumers and investors, are changing the way that the world relates to business practice and philanthropic practice?
I think we often talk about financial when we talk about philanthropy, but giving of your time, even in a financial sense, is far greater if you calculated the hours that people give. And so being a mentor to someone else, if you can give one person opportunity, you have a chance to change the world. So I think the first element that people need to understand is how important it is of giving of your time. A high school student helping an elementary student, a college student helping a middle school student or a high school student as a mentor. And so what we've constantly tried to do is figure out how do you get leverage. In launching our National Educator Awards, in an industry in the United States with the world's largest economy, $600-700 billion a year was spent on K-12 education. There is no foundation, even the largest foundation, the Gates Foundation, alongside support from Warren Buffett, could not make a financial difference that was substantial in the educational system. But if you could figure out how to leverage, so in our case, our goal was, could we raise the self-respect of the teaching profession through a National Educator Award program? and raise how education and the teacher was viewed in society by bringing more respect and self-confidence. That provides a lot of leverage. The other element is the ability today with technology to launch different programs. So we launched a program in raising money for cancer research where the average donation was $2. And if you mailed it in, if you wrote a check, if you did something, the cost of processing would far exceed. But by using digital means today, small donations can be made. And so it has changed, and linking this element for young people who are much more likely to be technology oriented. The idea that a billion people giving you $1 is $1 billion has far greater effect than one person giving you $1 billion. So to me, Badr really takes two parts: giving of yourself and your time, and two, large numbers of small amounts change the world. And I think the other element that people don't realize is how much one person can influence a person's life. When you talk to people that have gone off on a path, often they identify one teacher, just one teacher in their life that gave them a love of reading, gave them a love of mathematics, gave them the confidence that they could succeed. When I look at places like sub-Saharan Africa, I see millions of optimistic young people if given the opportunity to succeed. And technology today has that ability. And if you look at many of the new companies, new software companies, technology companies, whether it was Salesforce or whether it was Google, many of them, and when they founded, set aside 1% of their revenue or a percentage of their profits that would go for philanthropy. And if you look at a company like PayPal today, my guess is they will have raised $6 to $8 billion. So they will have raised more money than Gates and Buffett will give away in donations that probably are less than $1 US to be disseminated. And so to me, technology gives us a different look on philanthropy today.
Absolutely. And I just want to mention as another example of that and an opportunity is Islamic philanthropy, where you have 2 billion people who collectively give today an estimate of anywhere between $300 billion to $1 trillion a year. And of course, you have high net worth individuals giving large amounts, but the majority of that is actually in much smaller alms giving. So, sub $100. But collectively, with the 2 billion Muslims in the world, huge amount of philanthropic capital. Of course, being able to aggregate that funding would simply not be possible without the use of technology. So, in fact, I'm working with a few people to try and put together a digital platform to do just that. So I think I share your excitement about the potential that technology holds for transforming philanthropic impact. You, of course, established the Center for Strategic Philanthropy at the Milken Institute a number of years ago to advise philanthropists and foundations seeking to develop and implement transformative giving strategies. As you're aware, the Center for Strategic Philanthropy at Cambridge is focused specifically on philanthropy within and from the world's fastest growing markets, including the emerging economies of Africa, the Middle East, and developing Asia, where a lot of new wealth is being generated and trillions of dollars in assets are expected to be passed on to the next generation in the coming decade or so. What impact do you think these geographic and generational shifts will have on our global economy and social sector more specifically in the years to come?
Well, they're going to have a great effect. I think one of the first things in philanthropy that we were concerned about, as I look back over 50 years, is do no harm. Many well-meaning programs often have the exact opposite effect. There are other things that occur. And I would give you an example in the United States of many leading philanthropists and organizations who focused on busing for racial equality. It had certain objectives, but it broke down the neighborhood school. And for lower middle income or middle income, when they were told that their 7-year-old child was going to be bused for an hour, hour and a half to school every day each way, they moved because they couldn't afford private school or alternatives. And so one of the keys that we see with philanthropy is it positive or negative? Have you thought of the potential consequences of that philanthropy? Next, is your philanthropy productive? Are you doing something that someone had already tried decades ago, years ago? Particularly in education and in medical research, a great deal of all the philanthropy is either not productive or wasted. And so in medical, you found that if a person had a serious life-threatening disease and was treated by a doctor, that grateful patient would fund the doctor. Now, the doctor was a clinician, not a researcher, but now had this idea they wanted to be a researcher, but might not necessarily be qualified for it. And so you found a very low return. The other element I would say that we discovered in our own philanthropy is the highest return is giving it to young people. And so we were focused on people who had long careers, identifying those talented people. And what we discovered in our early philanthropy, if I pick medical as an example, we used to give a lot of funds to people at the peak of their career. Very little was ever accomplished in the future. And yet, if you talk about medical, someone that's gone to medical school, got a PhD, fellowship, internships, residencies, they're often in school for 15 years. And so when we talk about a young investigator, they might be 33 or 35 years old. And what we discovered over a 40-year period of time is every young scientist that we funded was later funded by government, industry, business. And the people at the peak of their career, very few of them. And when you look at Nobel Prizes that are issued, many times you'll see a person 60 or 70 years old that won that Nobel Prize, but the ideas that the prize was given for when they were in their 20s or 30s. And so to me, one of the great challenges here is to get money out earlier in this process and to identify individuals that can change the world. It is no different in business to identify an individual who had the talent to build a business, an industry, etc., a real pioneer. There are many people who's chosen a philanthropic path in their life. They could have run a company, but by empowering them, they can change the world. So part of the effort in this strategic philanthropy is to try to make sure your philanthropy is productive, that you're not reinvesting in something, and lastly, something that would have been funded anyway. So you're looking for areas that have not been funded. And that is one of the key roles, particularly in emerging markets, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, in the Middle East, things that are not both in the West and in the Middle East. A great deal of the philanthropy is religious philanthropy. In the United States, for example, it's the largest amount of philanthropy goes for religion, and I'm assuming in the world, in the Middle East, and the entire Islamic world, that a very large percent goes for that. But one of the questions here that we have to look at in history, in debate, is whether what occurred in Europe is going to occur in the rest of the world. And so when I say what occurred in Europe, Southern Europe dominated the world, Italy, Spain, Portugal, their explorers, etc. But the Reformation that occurred in Germany, the separation of religion and state, at that point in time, the creation of stock companies that shared risks, Northern Europe has dominated Southern Europe ever since that occurred. And so the question, and as we look at philanthropy, is what is the most effective form of this philanthropy? And is it sustainable? Much of the work at our center has looked at very interesting ideas and projects, but they're not sustainable. The cost per person is so great. And that is the exciting thing about what you're seeing in India or other parts of the world, where you have to figure out how it can operate at a cost and a financial sustainable level that is realistic for those societies. And that to me is one of the most important things a Center for Strategic Philanthropy can do, is to advise people. The enormous wealth creation today, particularly in Asia, far greater than people realize, and in the Middle East and the other parts of the world. The role of a center like the one that you have endowed here at Cambridge and are involved with can make a tremendous difference in the future for the world.
Those are great insights and advice, Mike. Thank you very much. I just want to stay on the topic of medical philanthropy. You have a long history of practicing strategic philanthropy focused on medical research and public health. What is the optimal role for private philanthropy in the field of medical research? And for philanthropists and aspiring philanthropists watching this, that are interested in this space, especially in the midst of a global health pandemic, what advice would you give them on how best to engage in this space when they may not always understand the intricacies of the science behind it?
So the first comment I would make is a statement you've heard me say very, very often. More than 50% of all economic growth in the world in the last 2 centuries can be traced to advances in public health and medical research. The greatest, probably, thing that humankind has created has been a doubling of life expectancy in the last 120 years. Life expectancy on our planet was only 31 years of age in 1900. And it only increased by 11 years in millions of years of evolution. So we've now gone from 31 to the mid 70s in a very short period of time in the history, this 120 years. And an increase of 100% in life expectancy in South Asia in those last 120 years. And not only increase in life expectancy, but quality of life. So when you look at some of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, their median age is 15 to 16 years old. Half the people in the country are 15 to 16. They're about to see, with the medical advancements, a doubling of life expectancy in one generation, grandparents with grandchildren. And so we've constantly tried to say that, and this COVID-19 has brought it home again, of how important this is for a child to go to school who's had food, who's healthy, and is not dealing with very serious medical issues, changes the world for them. And so when you look at the response on COVID-19, the first element is 3% of R&D or medical research is philanthropy, but it is the risk capital. And so many years ago when we tried to change the paradigm for medical research, realizing that you're the venture capital, the startup capital for new ideas. And if they work, then they're supported in a larger way by business and government. So my first comment to you, in emergencies, philanthropic capital can move quicker generally than governments or even businesses. So you need PPE to deal with COVID-19, you need ventilators, you need masks, whatever it is. We've seen a tremendous outpouring. To me, it's impossible to have a strong society if you don't have a healthy society. And so any nation, and as we saw AIDS ravaging sub-Saharan Africa, today the advancements in AIDS, a woman, when you think about it, only 20 or so years ago, maybe 25 years ago, had a 95 to 98% probability of passing AIDS onto their children in childbirth. Now with technology, she has a 95 to 98% not. Just imagine a whole generation of children that are not born with AIDS. And so these changes that have occurred are benefiting these fast-growing parts of the world. The vaccines that prevent them from getting diseases have been around long before we focused on the COVID vaccine and made a difference. The efforts on polio, which were driven by philanthropy, so that we could eliminate polio or other diseases from planet Earth. And so I think we underestimate the importance of public health. For a government, the highest rate of return on government money is public health. Being able to drink water that doesn't give you disease, that's healthy. These elements, one of the things we were so concerned about in the last year or so was food security. Could we get food and distribute food from that standpoint? And so you don't have to be an expert in molecular biology. When the Chan Zuckerberg initiative was launched, neither of them at the time were an expert in molecular biology, et cetera, but they hired individuals to lead that effort for them. So once again, in many ways, philanthropy is dependent on either picking people to represent you in areas that require great technical knowledge, to find those that have the ability to change the world.
That's both enlightening and inspiring. Before we wrap up, Mike, I just want to touch on the issue of convening. One of the top priorities of the Centre for Strategic Philanthropy at Cambridge is to convene diverse voices from around the world, and especially from the emerging markets, to advance our understanding and practice of strategic philanthropy with a view, of course, to maximizing its impact. What have you found to be some of the most effective ways to ensure discussions convened by the Milken Institute, for example, are inclusive by nature, and to ensure that these conversations actually lead to getting things done as opposed to being simply talking shops?
This is an extremely important question you've asked. And I, many years ago, became a strong believer that demographics was destiny. And so as we look at the world today, we often don't think about where it's going, but where it is. So the United States, for example, someday the majority of people in the United States will be of Asian or Latin American ancestry. A state like California today, more than 50% of everyone in California is of Latin American ancestry, and more than 70% of the children in Los Angeles school system are of Latin American. So understanding the changes that are undergoing, the growth of the Islamic population and the importance of how it views philanthropy and what is its initiatives in philanthropy is exceedingly important to the world as the wealth of individuals from Indonesia and other countries in the world increases. How are they going to deploy their philanthropy from that standpoint? So that's the first point. And when I think about the world, and you've heard me say it many times, it might not make any difference what we've done if we don't create opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa. The UN is projecting a 4 billion increase in this century in the world's population, from 7 billion to 11. Almost that entire increase is in sub-Saharan Africa. So when I look at Nigeria today, a country whose population is maybe 60% of the United States, they have twice as many children born in Nigeria as born in the United States. And at the current birth rate, they have the highest birth rate of any country that has 200 million people or more today. And that is why that the United Nations and others have projected that in fact, Nigeria someday, 100 years from now, might be the most populous country. What are the opportunities for the people in Nigeria? From a religious standpoint, about half the states are majority Muslim and about half the states are majority Christian. So they themselves have their own diversity within. So what we have tried to do from a diversity standpoint in all of, let's say, our philanthropic programs, if I look at our Milken scholars, they were born in more than 40 countries. Their parents were born in more than 70 countries. As they convene, they themselves have much different views of the world. And so the question to us is, how do you see the world through new eyes? What are one of the qualities of a great philanthropist is the ability to see the world through someone else's eyes, to understand not from their viewpoint, but from other people's viewpoints. And I think that is essential. The United States had the benefit for over 100 years of enormous immigration to the country. And whether it came from India in recent years or China, which have been the leaders in immigration to the United States, or Latin America or other parts of the world, you've had the benefit of their ability from that standpoint. And so to me, this diversity is strength. If I was to make an analogy, the strongest metals today and alloys are generally a mixture of different. So they're not all copper and they're not all iron, but they're made in different ingredients. And the strength of a society is its diversity from that standpoint. And so what we find is if the philanthropists themselves have diversity and they search for diversity in their efforts, then you get these viewpoints that are quite different. The world today allows you to see the world through so many different viewpoints. There's an app today, I think Apple has it, where you can read newspapers from 54 countries. So you don't have to read how the world is reported from your local newspaper. You can see how the world is reported from any place in the world. But it starts with diversity, in my opinion, in the philanthropic organization itself. If you look at the centers of the Milken Institute, and they've grown from 7 to 10 now, the majority of people that lead those centers are women. They view the world differently. And so we have an enormous diverse group of people. Our Faster Cures Center, Esther Krofa was born in Nigeria. So how she views healthcare, medical research, public health might be quite different coming from Nigeria than someone who grew up in New York City. I would say, Bonner, it's very hard to get diversity if your own organization is not diverse.
Absolutely. No, I love so much of what you said there about really the strength of diversity and also about compassion, right? Seeing through the eyes of the other, which underpins, human values really at its core. It is the common thread between all our monotheist faiths and other faiths. Of course, not unfortunately practiced as much as we all need it to be practiced these days. Thank you, dear Mike, for your ongoing friendship, which I truly value, and for being such a force of nature in advancing so many of the crucial issues we've just discussed. I look forward to catching up in person in the hopefully near future, and wish you and the family and all your colleagues the best of health and well-being in the months and years ahead. Thank you again.
And I couldn't be more excited about your personal initiatives and the role you play not only in the world, but particularly in the Islamic community. And I think the combination of the wealth, particularly of the Gulf states and individuals, and this outreach to the fastest growing regions in the world will change the world. And that is really part of what a true philanthropist is. You see the challenges of the world, you see what might happen, and you intervene to make sure something that would be very detrimental never occurs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.